There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is actually a blast from the past. This is Karen from Maine joining us for the first time since early days of Bite Size Book Chats, way back on episode 18. Karen, welcome back at long last.
Hi, thanks for having me, Sean.
Great to have you here. What kind of gave me a kick in the pants to invite you back was that you spent a lovely day out with the book Krugers in your part of the world. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Well, I did. I had a super fun day with Chris and Emily from the Book Cougars. There was part of their Scarlet Summer that they've been doing. So they've been reading books affiliated with Nathaniel Hawthorne, the Scarlet Letter, and or witch affiliated items. And so we visited Salem, Massachusetts, primarily to visit Nathaniel Hawthorne's the house that inspired the House of the Seven Gables. But we also checked out some other Salem sites, such as the memorial to the people that perished or were hanged and or died as part of the Salem witch trials. And so we just had a great time. There's also a really delicious hot dog / grilled cheese place that we checked out. It was delicious.
Oh, it looked from your Instagram posts and whatnot that you had a great time. And we're here to talk about one of your top reads from last month. And you read it in advance, and you're going to tell us a little bit about that. But it's a brand new novel. We're recording this chat on September 7th, and it was published on September 5th. An American novel called The River We Remember by William Kent Krueger. First, tell us how this advance reader's copy came into your hands.
Okay, well, in addition to my lovely book Cougars, I'm also a Patreon member of the podcast called Thoughts from a Page, which is run by a woman named Cindy Burnett, who is out of Houston, which I'm also affiliated with Houston, Texas. And so I found out about her podcast through local Houston television. And she does a lot of various things, but her initial podcast is mostly author interviews. Anyway, if you're a patron member, she has a thing called the Traveling Galley, and she sends out a galley to one patron and then gives you the address of the patron that you should send it to next. And so the galley travels from patron to patron to patron, and it's super fun.
Okay. So that's how you got to read it last month. So tell us about the book.
It's set in 1958, small town, Minnesota. And it's a murder mystery, and the inciting incident is one of the big landowners, largest landowners of that small town, Joel, Minnesota, is found caught alongside a riverbank, died from a shotgun blast. And so, of course, the big problem is to figure out who did this murder. But it's more than a murder mystery because it's got one of the main suspects, at least according to most of the community members, is a Native American man who has been in the military. He's a very accomplished, served in 20 years in the military, but he had served in World War II and married a Japanese woman. And so, of course, there's a bunch of prejudice from both the Native side and the Japanese side. So they want to pin the murder on him. And so the sheriff really is hoping not to have that happen. And so he's got to figure out who it is, or somehow get the town to not witch hunt the Native American citizen named Noah Bluestone.
I didn't realize until we started talking just a few minutes ago, before we started our recorded chat, that it could be seen as a murder mystery. So I have a bit of an allergy to murder mysteries. So I'm going to need you to sell me hard on the fact that it's also a literary novel.
It is. Well, first of all, is more literary than the typical murder mystery. He's just a wonderful storyteller. His prose is, I wouldn't say it's 100% poetic, but it leans toward the poetic side. He's got beautiful epigraphs and little quotations that start parts of the book that are beautiful. Then he's got really serious themes, like in this one, prejudice. He's got a woman who's going to be the attorney who represents Noah Bluestone, and she's got a much more liberal consciousness than a lot of the other people in the town. And so that's really interesting. And then also there is a young man, a teenager, and his friend who are involved. And that's a little bit of a Bildungsroman. William Krueger does the Bildungsroman better than anybody. So if you like that type of book, this would appeal to you in that sense. And post-traumatic stress. A lot of the people in the town are, even though people think, I heard an interview with this author that actually was on that Thoughts from a Page podcast. And one of the things that Krueger was really trying to demonstrate through this book is that the 50s wasn't really a golden era where everyone was super happy, that lots of people that had served in the war had post-traumatic stress. And so not only did that affect them, but it affected the people around them who, their loved one came back as an entirely different person, and they had to readjust to that new person. And then the other thing is, and this is just lightly mentioned, but this might appeal to you. One of the reasons that the people don't like Noah is because there was all that trauma from during the Civil War in the United States, the Sioux people had revolted because they were starving. And that set off a little bit of a war between the natives and, of course, the population in Minnesota. And so, like, the land that Jimmy Quinn, the murdered man in the story, part of that land originally belonged to Noah Bluestone. And, he lost it through all of this dissension between the fact that there was a war, and then of course he left and went and served in World War II. And anyway, so that's just basically touched on, but still it provides an interesting lens to view this book.
Well, it sounds socio-politically complex, so I'm getting more and more interested by the minute here.
Yes. Well, and that's one of the things that he does really well, is he creates really complex characters. For example, the sheriff, it's the opening passages are from the sheriff's point of view. And so you expect him to be a 100% good guy. And I'm not going to spoil what he does, but very early on in the book, he does something and you go, whoa, what's that about? And so it really, something more is going on right away. So that's, of course, intriguing.
So if it's not a spoiler to answer this question, Karen, what's the title about? The title is The River We Remember.
Well, that's one of the poetic elements, because there's a quote, a big long quote in the book about the river we remember, but it's basically how every point in a river is different. And so every person is going to have a slightly different remembrance of that river. And so it's kind of a nice way to think, even for different stages in their own life, they'll have a different memory of the river.
And didn't you say the murder victim, Jimmy Quinn, he was found floating in the river? So yeah, that's a tie-in as well.
Correct. William Kent Krueger, for those of you who are into murder mysteries, if you haven't tried him, try this author. This is my second Krueger book. And just from everything that I can tell, he's just a masterful storyteller. He does have a list of 18 in a series. I haven't even started that, but he's got several standalones too. And so far, I think he's a very good writer.
Karen, thanks so much.
It's great to talk to you.
It's always a delight to welcome a brand new guest to Bite Size Book Chats, and not only a brand new guest, but a new to me booktuber. He's been around on BookTube for a couple of years, but recent discovery of mine. This is Nathan joining us from Korea, and his channel name is Nathan's Nook. Welcome, Nathan.
Hello. It's great to be here.
It's
Love the
great to
channel.
meet you. Thank you. I love yours. So it's a mutual admiration society. For people that don't know your channel, tell us about your channel and what you do there, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I mostly read literary fiction, and it's more lifestyle vlogs with the books I'm reading and incorporated with all that. But yes, the whole jig is reading is sexy, and if you're not reading, you're not sexy. So thanks for being sexy, Sean.
Well, it's not every day I get such a compliment from a nice young man, so thank you.
Duly welcome.
And literary fiction. You agreed that it exists. It is a valid term, literary fiction, so we're getting
It's a
along
real
famously
thing.
here.
Yes.
Absolutely. Very good. And we're here to talk about, I think it's your top read of 2023, isn't it?
It is.
This is a book that hasn't even been published yet, so you must have gotten an ARC or something. It is by a Canadian writer that I have never read. It's called Alphabetical Diaries by Sheila Heti, and it comes out at least somewhere in the world in early February. Tell us about this book, Nathan.
Yes, Sean, I'm surprised that you haven't read any Sheila Heti. Where's the Canadian representation?
Well, it's somewhat of a low priority in my reading priorities, but yeah. I also have to say that what I've heard about her doesn't sound like she'd be a writer for me. So,
Yes.
Nathan, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to convince me as to why I should try Alphabetical Diaries in particular and Sheila Heti in general.
Yes. So I think Sheila Heti is very much acquired taste. She, I think, comes from the writing early 2000s or the teens of the 2000s, where it takes sentimentality in a way where it is sort of the beginnings of autofiction. So I think if you enjoy autofiction, Sheila Heti is sort of the writer that one should go to. But for Alphabetical Diaries, what she has done is not literary fiction, works in the same realm, but it is her diaries, which was originally serialized, I think in the New Yorker or the New York Times. So it was serialized diary entries that she had alphabetized. So what she's done is she's collected 10 years of her diary entries and alphabetized them. So with every serialization, it would be A, and then the next week it would be B, and then the next week C, and so on and so forth. But it's through this curation and this new look at curation that Heti, she uses these gimmicks within her books. For Motherhood, she uses the idea of I Ching, where she flips a coin and it sort of dictates the movement and the motions of the novel with this singular flip of a coin and answering these yes or no questions. So she'll have these really diet, existential, philosophical questions, have the coin answer yes or no to it, and then dictates her own life through that book. So in every one of her novels, there's this sort of gimmick that works. And for this one, she has chosen the ABCs, the most simple and fundamental basic foundation of why writers write. You know, we have these 26 letters, right? This combination of 26 letters rearranged in a way to evoke empathy. And I think from the baseline, it's so beautiful in how a writer is able to do that with all the books that we've read. It is just a really simple arrangement of 26 letters. It's really quite complex if you think about it.
So tell me more, because I'm having trouble visualizing this. When you say alpha, is it sorted alphabetical by the first letter of the first word of each sentence, or how is it sorted?
Yes, that's right. So every sentence within the 10 years of her diary entries that start with A will be within the category of A, and anything starting with B, every sentence will start with B. And it's really interesting when you watch the progression of the way that these words are alphabetized, because every single sentence that starts with B begins with the verb to be, be. So every single sentence at the beginning of that portion is be this. And I think I can do a bit of reading here. I marked this. The portion of be starts with that verb to be, and then it moves into best. So we have B-E-S-T. So best not to live too emotionally in the future. It hardly ever comes to pass. Next sentence, better to be on the outside where you have always been all your life. Even in school, nothing changes. Better to look outward than inward. Better to say nothing. Let her path be her own. Blowjobs and tenderness. books that fall in between the cracks in all aspects of human endeavor. And it's this arrangement that is what feels so random when you read it. When you read within the 10 years and all these sentences together, it's these parts of her past speaking to each other that create this very oddball-like rhythm that becomes quite meditative, but also like song. And it's really beautiful in the way that she constructs it. But there are also portions where, like from G, when you move from G to H, the sentences within G, they start with get. And then when she moves into the H portion, the sentences begin with have. So it's this beautiful formness within our ABCs that she gets from get to have. What do we get and what do we have? It's this beautiful formulation. And for Q, she has a single sentence, which I love. Because when you think about it, I don't think we begin most sentences with Q. So she has, for Q, quiet days, not seeing people, feeling fine, as a single sentence for Q. And it's just beautiful the way that her life progresses and the way that she curates these sentences in ABC order. And it's in the profundity and the mundanity, I think, that there's much beauty. I think most of life is, quite mundane, but there are ways that we find song and meaning and joy, even from the most boring bits. And we always want to convey that, I think. And here, Heti conveys what feels like 10 years of boredom, but also anxieties and minutia over marriage and just philosophical inquiries and sex and bits of depression and everything, mommy issues. It's just all of this culminated into this beautiful curation. And there are funny bits to it and sad bits to it. And I think that's what makes the song so sweet in this one.
Several of the examples that you read, they started with verbs. So is that part of just the way she wrote, that she started a lot of sentences with verbs? Or is she not actually starting from the first word in the sentence when she alphabetizes?
That's the thing. We don't know. And I think that's the brilliance of Heti and the way that she creates fiction and meddles with autofiction, because we are unsure if she wrote the sentences like that within her diaries. I don't know how strict she was in creating this curation.
Okay. So how do you, this is, you have piqued my interest, young man, but
my job.
How does one read this? So I'm imagining that when I'm reading it, I'm going to be trying to keep track of the various strands of a story and trying to sort it out like a jigsaw puzzle as I read, but that's probably not the best way to read it. How did you read it?
Yeah, so what I did was I essentially read just straight through. I think once you realize how it works and the rhythm, by B or C, you understand the rhythm and you understand portions of life that don't really say a lot. But then later, if you get into like another letter, G or H, you get a better sense. So by the end, when you get to Z, you get this huge collage and it all makes sense in a way, in this very strange way. And I think that's just life, isn't it? It's a finding order within the chaos, which is funny because if life is order within chaos, and here she is creating order within chaos, is there then sort of a perfected way of organization? Is there a perfected way in how we can look at our lives and really create something that makes sense within so much chaos?
Well, your eloquence is just stirring. So I wonder if her book is going to be as eloquent as you are talking about it. But wow, I could listen to you all day, Nathan. Do you keep a diary or a journal?
Yes, I do. I do the morning pages from The Artist's Way. Have you done? You do any journaling at all?
I'm not currently journaling, but for most of my adult life, I have. I've kind of took a break about 7 or 8 years ago. Want to start it up again. But I also don't want to give up reading time. So it's a bit of a inner conflict. But have you been inspired to do something, even if it's just for yourself, similar to Sheila Heti's project with your own journal sentences?
Yes. So I keep to the morning pages, which is this idea where you just flesh out 3 pages of anything just in the morning, just to get everything off the table, clears the mind. It's really nice to do in the morning. But after having read this, it has made me look at sentences very differently. It has made me look at how I organize my life, how certain portions of my life that I talk about within journaling, and how to reorganize it and present it in a way that isn't just mundane to myself, but I guess already creating the beauty while existing within the mundanity. I think so much of life has lost slow living. We live in this such fast-paced world with so many apps, YouTube, TikTok, and all. We realize, I think, the lesser beauties within the world, like a simple walk within the park. I will say, coming out of this book, I've looked at sunlight a lot differently, the lights within the day, I think, and just measuring sort of the days in light that way versus time. I'm very time heavy. I have to do this at 11. I have to have dinner at 5. All of these things measured by time. But, you know, life is measured, I think, in different ways. And yeah, so I've been looking at light differently, air, the way that the air feels different sometimes within the day. And yeah, it's just, again, this look at curation. How do we better curate our lives? How do we better tally it or tally it differently? And it makes me wonder, because here it is within 10 years of Heti's life, right? What is 10 years? How do you shrink 10 years, select these sentences within this, you know, what is, I think a paperback, it will be 200 pages or so. It's like, how do you do that? You know, how do you curate life? I think is really the question that Heti asks, and asks of us when we tackle this novel.
Well, I want to say in conclusion that I want to curate Nathan to come back for as many future episodes of bite-sized book chats or anything else I got going on my channel as his schedule will permit.
Have I sold the book? Are we going to reach Heti now?
I'm going to try a Sheila Heti. I've got one on my shelf. It's an early one called Ticknor. I'll probably start with that, but this one you certainly have sold me on giving it a try at some point. Absolutely.
Beautiful. I hope you do. It's a wonderful read. Yeah, it comes out by FSG early February. I hope people do pick it up. It's quite an interesting way at looking at life, and I love a book that can do that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Nathan.
Of course.
It's a lovely treat to have Nancy of the Literate Quilter blog and book reviewer extraordinaire joining us from the Detroit area. Back again. Hello, Nancy.
Hi, Sean. It's so good to be back with you again.
So Nancy is here today to talk about the latest offering by the American novelist Paulette Jiles. She is most well known, I think, for her 2016 novel, News of the World, which I loved. And her latest one is Chenneville. Am I pronouncing that right, Nancy? Chenneville?
It's French, so you tell me.
Well, Americans don't pronounce the French way. So I'm going to say Chenneville, which has a subtitle, a novel of murder, loss, and vengeance, which has just been published about 4 days ago at the time that we're recording this, on September 16th. And Nancy wrote a wonderful review, which will be linked in the show notes. And here she is to sell us all on it. So tell us about this book, Nancy.
This book was interesting to me, first of all, because of the author. I've read the author's books. There was The Color of Lightning that I read quite a number of years ago. And then I got an arc of Simon the Fiddler, which I read. And then it was News of the World, which I read. And then my book club read it, so I listened to the audiobook. And my husband and I watched the movie. And so when I saw this book was coming up, I put in my name to get an advanced reading copy to read it, because I just love this author. I think she's a wonderful writer. This particular book was quite intense and dark. It is about a man who, at the beginning of the book, comes to after months in a coma, after having head trauma from an explosion while he's working for the Union Army. And he wakes up, the war is over, Lincoln's assassinated. He knows he's very disoriented because he's lost so much because of the trauma and being in a coma. And he has to kind of put his life back together. put his health back together, go back home to the plantation north of St. Louis to find out what has happened to his family. And so it starts in a very intense situation. When he gets back to the plantation, it's in quite a ruin. His mother is left, and he finds out that his sister, who had married a Confederate soldier, and their child have all been murdered. They were murdered by a man who was an appointed sheriff in the area where they lived. And that appointed sheriff had complete control, and he decided he was killing Confederates, those who had served in the Confederate Army. And he killed the wife and the child too, because they were part of the family. So at this point, the first section of the novel, our main character, John Chenneville, has nothing left in the world to live for. His fiance is dead, his family's gone, the plantation's in ruins. He figures the only thing he has left in life is avenging the death of his sister.
And that's well advertised in the subtitle, a novel of murder, loss, and vengeance. I find vengeance as a theme really boring. Is it an interesting?
Well, what's interesting about the novel is it's really a journey story. It's a story of traveling across for hundreds of miles down to Galveston, Texas, tracking down this man, Dodd, who had committed the murders, and the people he meets along the way. Early on, here he is, he's still recovering from the trauma of the head injury. Things like his memory, the ability to find words, ability to write and everything. So he has all those challenges, and he's traveling this landscape that's been devastated by war. And so you find out what the world was like after the war. There was really chaos. There was, especially in terms of law. So it's a very fraught landscape he's traveling across, but he meets people like a telegraph operator who brings him in and takes care of him, helps him. And through him, he meets another telegraph operator who's a woman. He meets a Native American boy who has run away from a residential school. He meets a woman whose husband was killed in the war, who's trying to survive alone on their land in the middle of the woods all by herself. So he meets all these interesting people on the way. His motivation, of course, is vengeance, but there's more to the book than that. And the writing is beautiful, the descriptions, of course, and not only of his internal life, but the world that he sees. The description is very beautiful writing.
I remember how beautiful I thought the writing was in News of the World.
In this book, it's about a man who's had everything taken away from him. And he thinks that vengeance is the only thing he has to live for. And he has to evolve from that, too. By the end of the book, there's been a moment of grace.
Okay, well, that's that does not qualify as a spoiler, but that gives me hope that it will be worth getting all the way to the end to see what
it
happens.
doesn't the way you think it does. Or would.
That's wonderful. That sounds great. Nancy, thank you for telling us about the book.
Okay. Glad to share it with you. I hope people pick it up and read it.
Oh, great to have Vansa back joining us again from India. Hello, Vansa.
Hi, Sean. Nice to be back on this. It's always fun discussing books with you.
Great to see you. And you're here to talk about a book that's near and dear to my heart. Usually on this series, I invite readers to come on and chat about books that I have not read, but I'm interested in reading. I'm making an exception here because this is a book that I loved as a kid and don't remember anything about. So it's still going to be all new to me, whatever you say. And this is a children's novel called When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr, originally published in 1971. And you recently read it. Tell us what you thought. Tell us about this book.
So I haven't read any Judith Kerr. Her books they're not talked about in India when you talk about the Nazi books written set during the Nazis and so on. It's more Anna Frank and Leon Uris and so on. So I've actually never read her at all. I've never even heard of her. So she actually died a few years back. And that's when I actually heard about her and about her books. This one anecdote that was repeated in the obituaries, actually, I want to read the book because of that. So she said that she and her children were watching The Sound of Music. And her son, who was a child at the time, said, so now we know what it was like for Mummy during World War II. And she thought about, and that struck her as, her lived experience was very different from a musical, obviously. So she thought that she should, set her mind to maybe writing about what it was like for her as a child. And so this book comes out of that, actually. It's actually the first. She went on to write 2 other books in the trilogy. It's semi-autobiographical, set in Berlin. Anna and her family lead this very cosmopolitan Weimar Republic sort of life. Her father is a journalist, a very well-regarded journalist, theater critic. And as the Nazis start gaining more political importance, he is vocally anti-Nazi. So the book deals with the fallout from that because they have to leave their home. So it takes you through her experiences and it ends with them finally leaving for England. So that's a short summary of the book.
I think I read this when I was about 11 or 12 or something. And I've always remembered it was one of the first books I ever read about Nazi Germany or anything to do with that period of history. And it was a real shock to my system. And I remember vividly, I'll double check it against your recent reading, but that the young girl who's the protagonist is like walking down the street and she witnesses Nazis committing some terrible act of anti-Semitism, and it just shocks her to her core, and it shocked me to my core, and that's all I remember about the book.
So actually, you did read it, at a perfect age, because since it's written from a child's perspective, it would be a perfect introduction to children for to show you how actually all politics is personal, and it will become personal sooner or later. It's actually a very good introduction for children to realize the actual the personal effects it will have on you and your family ultimately. And she brings that out really well, because when you're a kid, your parents don't really tell you too many things because they're afraid that it'll upset you or disturb you, but kids pick up. And that actually makes it a little more frightening because you don't know how bad it really is and how worried you really should be. And she brings that out extremely well. And both she and her elder brother they can pick up on the undercurrents. Her elder brother a little more because he is around 12, 13, then she's around 10 years old.
So you read it as an adult for the first time, and how did it stand up as from the perspective of an adult?
It actually held very well. I honestly thought that I've read so much about World War II and the Holocaust and all the atrocities and, multiple theaters, the Eastern Front, the Western Front, the action in Russia, and so on. And of course, the Diary of Anne Frank when I was a child, then about the Warsaw Ghetto and so on. This was a very different perspective, and it actually did add quite a lot to all of those readings. It held up really well as an adult as well, because the thing is, this wasn't this military dictatorship which oppressed people or anything. This was the Nazis were voted into power, and that was something which I found very powerful, that it's not necessarily people weren't forced into this at the barrel of a gun. They voted these people into power, and it was very easy to turn people's neighbors and their neighbors' minds into focusing on blaming just one community or a bunch of people for economic problems and things. And economically, the country was doing badly, and instead of looking for solutions to that, it was very easy for a bunch of populist politicians to just rouse people into blaming just one community and people with identities which they felt were not pure according to their versions of purity and identity.
Well, you've brought so much of this book, my early young childhood reading of the book back, and I'm really looking forward to reading it as a slightly older person myself. So, Vansa, thank you for telling us about it.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll enjoy it as an adult as well. Yeah, I'm sure you will.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's been fun doing this.